Hello and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, a very warm welcome. Today we'll be making goat meat stew exactly how I remembered when we used to make this back home in Togo. So let's get started. To make the stew, you are going to need the following ingredients. So we have some chopped onions in here, a couple of red bell peppers, a tin of chopped tomatoes, and one tin is more than enough. And then we're also going to be using some spices. So today I'll be using some black pepper, some all-purpose seasoning, some everyday seasoning, aromat note seasoning, and some dried parsley. We'll also be needing some tomato puree, and we'll be needing some anise seeds, ginger, rosemary, some bay leaves, and about 3 to 4 cloves of garlic. In my pot and all ready to be cooked, I have 1 kilo of goat meat that I asked the butcher to chop for me. And I also decided to add some tripes because I like the combination of goat meat and tripes. And these have been washed really well in water and a bit of lemon. So to begin, we need to boil the meat and have it nice and tender, so it does need some seasoning. So now I'm just going to go ahead and blend the ginger, garlic, anise seeds, as well as the rosemary sprig and some onion. And I absolutely love using rosemary, especially when I'm cooking goat meat or lamb. It goes so well. I think you should really try it. It does work. And I also added about half an onion and a bit of water just to get the blades running once the whole thing goes into the mixer. Here I'm just going to combine all of the spices that I mentioned earlier, and these are going to be poured onto the meat along with the blended mix. The pot is now ready to go onto the stove on a medium fire, and I'm just going to add a little bit of water to aid the stock, and this is going to cook for approximately 45 to 50 minutes. Meanwhile, we can go ahead and mix the tin tomato, the 2 red bell peppers, as well as the remaining onions. And I didn't rinse out the container where I mixed the ginger, garlic, and others earlier because we don't want to waste anything. And I'm doing this in 2 stages because my container wasn't big enough to do everything at once. And once all of this has been mixed, they can be added on to a separate pot. All of the contents have now been added into the pot, and you want to ensure that you rinse your container in the interest of saving everything because we don't want to waste. And the idea here is to steam the tomato and pepper mix until you get a nice paste. So this will be happening on medium heat for approximately half an hour. The meat has been cooking for approximately 20 minutes, so I just check back in to give it a quick stir, make sure that all of the spices are nicely combined, but it's far from done at this point, and I was going to leave it in for another 30 to 35 minutes. The meat has been cooking for just under an hour, and this is pretty much done in my case, but you might prefer your meat to have a bit more bite to it. I like my meat quite soft, which is why I leave it to steam for quite a while, but if you prefer it harder, then you may just want to leave it in for no longer than 40 to 45 minutes. So I'm just going to set this aside in time for frying at a later point. I left the tomato and pepper mix to steam for 25 minutes, and this is exactly what we are looking for. We have a nice paste here, and it's going to render the whole cooking process a lot quicker from here on. So we're going to set this aside and get ready to fry the meat. So in my wok I have about 2 cups of oil that I let heat up, and I'm only going to fry the goat meat. I decided not to fry the tripes because that's just my preference. I just wanted to give the meat a little bit of color, and we're going to fry this for about 10 to 15 minutes. So we have a nice stock here, as you can see, and the tripes remained in the pot, so these will be added on to the stew at a later point. So the meat, as mentioned, has been cooking for about 10 to 12 minutes, I believe. I think it was no more than 12 minutes. It's really quick, and it doesn't have to fry for too long because it's already cooked anyway. And I'm going to set this aside for a later point. As a healthier alternative, you may also prefer to put the meat into the oven as opposed to frying it, and that would work as well. I just decided I was going to fry the meat because we were going to be a little bit decadent, but you know, if you prefer, you could put it in the oven. So I'm just going to remove the meat and then set it aside for a later point. And at this stage, we have pretty much all of the components. So all we want to do now is bring everything together. So the tomato and pepper mix has been returned onto the stove. So I'm now just adding in a few spoonfuls of the same oil that I used to fry the meat. So we want to fry our tomato paste for a few minutes prior to adding some puree. So the oil has been added, so I'm just mixing everything together to make sure it's nicely combined, and you want to release all of the sweetness. Just remember, your tomato and pepper is already cooked, so it doesn't need to cook for too long. So that's the advantage of steaming the tomatoes beforehand. It just makes everything so much easier and quicker, and it reduces splashing as well. So I let the tomato and pepper cook for about 5 minutes before adding the tomato puree. So now I'm just combining everything, and I'm going to let this cook further for approximately 5 more minutes before adding some seasoning. Time to season the sauce, and it's really up to you what type of seasoning you'd like to use. You know, everyone has their preferences. I just went in with some all-purpose seasoning, some everyday seasoning, and I also added some freshly ground black pepper, as well as some dried parsley and a bay leaf. And I should have said, when we were cooking the meat earlier, I did add a couple of bay leaves into the meat. So this is the last one that I just dropped into my stew. So I'm just mixing everything up and combining. And once that's been done, we can go in and add the beautiful stock from the meat. So we added in the stock as well as the tripes that we did not fry, if you remember well. So these can now be added and then mixed up. The smell in the kitchen was bringing back so many good memories. This was the type of stew that my mother used to make when we would come back from church. So I'd be invited in the kitchen to crush the ginger, garlic, and onion, you know, all the rubbish jobs that I didn't really want to do. And my mother would do all the nice jobs, like, you know, seasoning the meat and stirring everything. And I used to want to do all these things, but I was never allowed. I was only allowed to crush the garlic and the ginger and the onions. But yeah, those were good times. And it was a special occasion type of stew. So yeah, on a Sunday usually we would be making that. So it's nice to bring this back, I think. So I just went in and added the fried meat, and we're almost done here really. So just combining, and we're going to let this cook, just bring everything together for a further 10 minutes. Now is also a good time to adjust your seasoning if needed. You may not need any, but I just went and added a little bit of pink Himalayan salt just for extra flavor, and that was all that was required really. And then you can cover this up and let this simmer on a low heat for approximately 10 more minutes. Look at this, it's done. The stew is finally completed, and you know, in any case, your stew is done if the oil has come back to the top. That is a telltale sign of any African dish that is done. If the oil has come back to the top, you are good, you are happy, everything is nicely combined, the spices came to know each other, and it's just a perfect mix. So yeah, this was going to be served in my case with some white rice and some plantain, again just to just to bring back the throwback from my childhood. So we would be having this here. Usually would be rice, plantain, and a side salad because my mother was very health conscious. And yes, I hope you enjoyed this recipe. If you did, give a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe as always and leave a comment. Let me know what you'd like to see from me, and I will see you very, very soon on my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye everyone.